Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to the Black Carnivore live stream. And today we are going to discuss the interview that we had with Nina Teicholz on Tuesday. And it was so jam-packed with information. I'm really gonna, kind of do my best to break down, all my thoughts and, discuss it with you guys. But I'm sure we won't cover everything. So, definitely read the book. That's going to be your best bet. So let's dive right in. What do you think? Sorry, Arien. I know your name, Arien.
What do I think about what?
Nina Teicholz, the book. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah, so I know her. I think I read one of her books. I can't remember which one, but I know that she knows a lot. I've seen her talk a lot about the American food guidelines. I think they're FDA or something, and how terrible they are. They're not based on any real science, and that even now, as she tries to push against them, there's a big effort to keep them the way they are and to not allow outside voices in.
Yeah. So the dietary guidelines was sort of her second project after getting the book done. So I didn't realize until the interview, but it actually took her 10 years to write The Big Fat Surprise. From other interviews I have seen, she kind of started out by I think she was like a food writer. And she went to all these restaurants and chefs, were giving her, meat and cheese, and she was losing weight and feeling great. So I think that was a little bit of part of it. And then she was supposed to do an article on trans fats and started doing some research, and that's kind of where it ended up, or where it landed. So,
Mm.
and that was kind of the beginning of it all. But I pulled out some clips of the interview that I liked. So let me pull up some of them, and yeah, let's start
This
here.
hypothesis, called the diet heart
Oops.
hypothesis,
Here we go.
that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease, right? So this hypothesis had been adopted by the American Heart Association, by the National Institutes of Health, it was like a clean sweep. So if you're in the field and you're not finding something that supports the diet heart hypothesis, it ruins your career. And in fact, I did talk to scientists whose careers were ruined because they came out with results and they were unafraid to talk about them that were contrary to the diet heart hypothesis.
So I think that was like one of the most surprising things for me is how little adherence there was to scientific culture and like what's expected of scientists. I don't know that I have seen that in other fields where people just are not being truthful and honest with their data and not publishing it and ruining careers over it.
Yeah, like as I learn about nutrition science and what has happened in the last, I guess, what, 60 years or so or longer, like it really, I wonder if the rest of science has this sort of drama because there's a lot of personalities and egos at play that like go against the entire idea of what we thought, what we were taught science was about.
Hmm.
That
Wait, you're breaking
I'm
up a
not
little.
su- sorry. I'm not surprised, but I did not know that there were scientists. I guess I kind of figured there were people who lost their careers, mainly because I would think that they just weren't being funded, as opposed to like people actively working against them.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I not only is that like a problem for active research, but I would imagine sends a chill down, any future scientists as well. So it means that like, you can't ever explore anything outside of the paradigm, which is, paid for by big pharma and
Right.
big food.
Right. Like by the companies, the ones who are making the stuff that you would end up making. Your honest research would go against those products. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's not surprising, but it's still awful to hear.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about, the cigarette companies and, all of the research that was suppressed then and how hard it was to get that stuff to come to light. I don't know what you think about that or if you paid attention to that. Well, I mean, that was back in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah, that wasn't really. I wasn't around then. I think the most that I was aware of as I was coming up was just that I remember there being a big issue when I was in like elementary school about cigarette companies still advertising in ways that it was argued were, and I think like they succeeded in that argument that they were like advertising kids. But yeah, that first stuff, the suppressing information, I know very little about. That's a part of history I haven't researched.
Yeah.
But this is
Okay.
similar to that, where these big companies are pushing against their food being shown to be harmful, just like cigarette companies did.
Well, no, I mean, it goes back even earlier than that, back to Ansel Keys, who was pushing the saturated fat, hypothesis as the cause of
Hmm.
cardiovascular disease. So in the book, I mean, she kind of goes back to, I guess it was in the 50s when you started to see a rise in heart disease. And then, and people were scrambling to, kind of identify what was the cause. And there were people even then saying that sugar was the cause. But Ansel Keys was a scientist and who seemed to be particularly ruthless. And, somehow he managed to dominate the conversation and really, sought to destroy the reputation of people who didn't fall in line. And then I think she was later able to uncover some evidence that the Sugar Association or whatever the sugar lobby was, even back then, had funded, these studies and these scientists. So from the beginning, there was a real tie between not the snack industry, because it didn't really exist as much, as yet, but, sugar, the Sugar Association itself. So, everybody who's watching, those of you who've read the book, let me know what questions or thoughts you have. I definitely would love to bring, make this a bigger conversation. I mean, because this is, I, I think that this is the core for many of us that, we've lost, or at least for me, I've lost faith in the medical institution. So,
Yep.
this has a very, very big impact on everything. It means I don't trust anybody, from dentist to podiatrist to cardiologist to neurologist. So this is a big deal, knowing that there's this kind of, I don't know, this kind of deception that's happening. And it's hard for me to believe that it's not rampant in all aspects of medicine. Okay,
Yeah,
so let me,
and
go ahead.
this was that that realization was real big for me, and it came from my own medical journey. And her book, it taught me that the authorities aren't the authorities. They're not there by merit. A lot of times, what they're giving you is wrong. And if they're so like incredibly wrong about food, then what else are they wrong about? And it's easy to see why they're wrong because of the money from the companies. Like it was part of my journey to understanding how this world actually works.
Yeah. And, and then of course the question is, what does it mean for us, as Black people,
Right.
that, the authority is so wrong? Like, what does that mean for our care? So, so let's dig in some more. Let's see. I pulled out a bunch of clips. It's more than we're going to be able to watch tonight, but let me see if I can put some kind of order to this.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah,
we're talking about, in terms of meat, what we're talking about is something that's, like, I think far, far more serious and just a much, much bigger story about scapegoating meat as the one thing that it drives climate change, the one thing that we can do to contribute to stopping the warming of the earth, the one thing. I mean, it's just become, that is it involves actors like the World Economic Forum at Davos and pretty much every celebrity you've ever heard of. And it's just a much bigger beast that has created this impression about meat.
So I see Stephanie says that distrust is not unlike some Black vegans' arguments. And I agree. I mean, this is why when we had our conversation about Black veganism, I get it, because we're still, we're all struggling to figure out the best path to health and the best way to stay out of the medical system. And, we're going with the information that we have, and I think that Black vegans are going with information that's been put forward, but there isn't, there hasn't as yet been an authoritative voice that, the standard audience, or the standard population knows about, is aware of, or believes, because there's been this, decades of misinformation being given to us. And so, naturally, I remember one time my grandmother was, this was back in the late 90s or early 2000s, and she was like, oh, I got you some popcorn. See, it says it's cholesterol free, so I chose this one. And it's like, well, actually, corn doesn't have cholesterol. So, like, that's, it was just, a marketing.
They didn't do anything.
Yeah, right. But it's like, it had sunken into her, this issue of cholesterol, but not really knowing why or having it make sense. So I think that's the problem that we have.
Oh, yeah. The marketing, I saw some stuff today that said tree nut and dairy free. And I thought, okay,
yeah,
tree nut free that sounds good. Dairy free? Wait, what's wrong with the dairy? Okay, y'all got it wrong. You're confused.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that, everyone, I mean, what I'm seeing, especially like in the vegan and the vegetarian world, is more and more things are being labeled problematic. But I don't understand what you do if you decide that dairy doesn't work for you, nuts don't work for you, meat doesn't work for you. It's like there's nothing left, and you can't, live on that. And it has to be gluten-free. I mean, that's like all you can eat is, like, I don't know, gluten-free crackers and cookies, essentially.
Right. It gets to a point where when I start thinking about, like, what would be a healthy, like, vegetarian diet, there's not much.
Yeah.
It's like
there really
salad
isn't.
All the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see.
And then that wouldn't be good for a whole different reason.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had just come out with my book, and I read the 2015, the latest iteration. They come out every 5 years. 2015 was the latest one, and I read it, this like 450-page document, and I couldn't believe that there was no science. None of the science that I had studied, none of the science that I knew was in there. Like the fact that 49,000 women had been through a clinical trial called the Women's Health Initiative on the low-fat diet, and that the results were what we call null, like no benefit from, and this trial had gone on for 8 years. So no benefit in terms of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or weight loss.
So that is kind of stunning to me. I think that that's information a lot of people would care to know, that there's,
Hmm.
that there isn't evidence that a low fat diet works. And it's sort of stunning.
Yeah. Um, between there's it's really frustrating when you find out about the studies that are actually out there. Like people will say, like, well, there's no food science that proves that this thing is actually better. If we really use good standards, then there's no data that's conclusive about anything. And that's like, that's false. I mean, we
Hmm.
can't say what the best is, but we definitely have some ideas of what works and what doesn't work. We've put people on low fat diets. We've put people on, what was it, low saturated fat diets, like switch all the saturated fat with some seed oil.
Hmm.
And we've seen that there's not a ton of studies, but there's a few and they're controlled well. People
Hmm.
like there was a much higher chance of death or earlier
Hmm.
death in the group that went low fat or whatever. Like the data is there and they don't actually use it, which then it makes tell me if you're on this page, but it makes me then wonder if the entire thing is corrupt, even like as far as the government. Like it's not just the researchers, it's everybody.
I mean, I guess I kind of feel like the government abdicated a long time ago. And, the National Institute for, is it the National Institute for Health? They fund science, but I think that there's far more money from the pharmaceutical companies and the snack food companies that is funding studies. And so, that's the problem, that there isn't a lot of independent science going on, and
Hmm.
that's the problem. So I don't know if it's, and I feel like that is a theme that's gone on for a couple of decades, where the government got out of science. And I don't know if that was, once we hit the moon, they were just like, you know what, this wasn't worth it. We spent a lot of money. We made it to the next planet or the next satellite, and we got some microwaves out of it, but we're done. We're done doing science. I don't know.
Right. Like,
What are your thoughts?
yeah. We we basically did on science. We just or on space especially. We said, we're good on space. We don't need to spend that money anymore.
Hmm.
And now we're going to space again. It feels like we're finally talking about space again, but it's all private.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
we
SpaceX
are
doing
not
it.
going to space.
Yeah.
We are
Like
not.
the government is funding it, but it's not us doing it.
Hmm.
And yeah, it seems the same way or something similar with the rest of the science. Like we just don't, the government doesn't just put the money up on its own to the
Hmm.
scientists to say, we want to find out what this does. And like if they did that, if they actually had scientists on staff, then maybe it wouldn't be such an issue about these guys needing to like, well, I get invited to this prestigious conference
Hmm.
if I if my research says the right things.
Hmm. Well, I don't know why people aren't more uneasy about letting private, people or institutions or companies really control so much of what we know about the world. I mean, that's what science is
Yes.
supposed to be, is, our learning about the world around us and how we can
Yeah.
manipulate it. But to abdicate so much of that to these corporations, like it's like it just doesn't seem safe to me. And I'm not one of those, people who's like, oh my God, 5G, caused all of these problems that we're living through
Hmm.
today. But it makes me wonder, like, well, why are they so upset about 5G? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is something I should be concerned about. I don't know. I just got the new iPhone 13. It hasn't come yet. I pre ordered it. And
Hmm.
it's supposed to have 5G. So I don't know. I could come on here and have like 5 heads next time. I don't know.
My phone has 5G now, I was just on the phone holding it to my face for like a good 45 minutes earlier today. I'm good.
That explains why you're so spacey.
Well, I'm so spaced.
Yeah. I don't know. So, okay. Well, let's see. Let's follow it. Look at another clip. Now, what did we just look at?
She was talking about the lack of science in the 500-page
Right.
document.
Here's
Well, this
another
paper goes
one.
over all the evidence on saturated fats and concludes that there's not evidence to support keeping these caps on saturated fats, right? So there's no reason that you should not eat as much meat as you like. Saturated fats should not be the rate limiting factor for you. But we looked specifically at their review and looking at all the studies that they selected, and they looked at them all, and we pulled all those studies and we pulled all the results from those studies, and it turns out that like 90% of their evidence didn't support their conclusion. So again, they were just, I don't know how to say it. They were untrue in what they concluded from the evidence. The evidence said no effect, or in the case of say stroke, saturated fats consistently shows a positive effect on in terms of reducing stroke. So that was just I don't really even know how that happens.
So, yeah, that was such a polite way of, calling people
Yes.
out as liars. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Nina is like trying her damnedest to like be professional, and I appreciate it, but I'm glad you said it, because if you didn't, I was going to. They lied.
Mm-hmm. They
90% of
lied.
your data goes against your conclusion, but you still ride hard for that conclusion. It's because you're lying. No one gets
Yeah.
mistaken by 90%.
Yeah. And I guess I'm still sort of, incredulous that this happened. And I asked her, like, how is it possible, that this can happen and nobody says anything, and I pulled up, I found a clip earlier, but I don't think I put it in, where she was basically saying that, there is no watchdog group to look at the dietary guidelines. So, they have no one to control what they say or do. So I do find that like kind of stunning. And I did say to her in the interview, nutrition science sort of seems like a sleepy corner of medicine. Like, when people think about, medicine, like they're thinking about, your regular doctor or, cardiologist or gynecologist, but, you don't really think about the dietitian who, maybe you see a dietitian, but most times, you're not engaging with the dietitian. They're the ones who are ordering the meal for you in the hospital or the nursing home. They're the ones who are, setting the menu at school or at, in a prison or some other kind of institution. So, like, you're never really coming in contact with them. So, I think from my perspective, it seems like they're just like, a sleepy little corner. But in fact, they, really just have a huge outsized impact on not only our lives, but like our industry, our corporations, our manufacturing, everything.
Yeah. And I want to say it's not talked about enough, but I guess in a sense it is. It's talked about too much. Like every stupid epidemiological study that one says eggs are bad and the next one 2 months later says eggs are good, like those end up talked about. But like this issue, like, hey, so the dietary guidelines are just produced by these people who have no oversight, and actually they run against their science. they say the exact opposite of what the science in front of them, what the data in front of them says. That's not
Mm-hmm.
talked about at all. It's crazy. It's let that happen with climate change. Let anyone even purport that that is happening with climate change. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
all over the news.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I mean, people have certainly tried that, but it kind of,
Yeah.
it falls flat. So, yeah, that's definitely a problem. So here's another clip that I, thought
They
was
heavily
interesting.
donate and give up to 25 to 30% of the budgets of the American Diabetes Association and the American Heart Association. So now you have sort of supposedly public interest organizations that are working not in our interest.
So she was talking about, these food companies, and I mean the pharmaceutical companies, and so talking about their interests in in like our health and in and in sugar or promoting sugar.
Mhm.
So she said in the interview that they they make money off of supplements and stuff like Ensure. And then they also make money off devices and medications and stuff like that. So when a person who's spending $1,000 a month on insulin gets off of insulin, like that's a problem for their bottom line. And
Yep.
that is, that's just so disturbing. And I think I don't really understand how you get out of that cycle. I mean, the
Look,
pharmaceutical industry has such a stranglehold on our country. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
that's a good question. Like, so how do you actually, and basically that's like, how do you fix the system? Um, the overall system. And I wonder, um, do you nationalize things? Do you find there's got to be the only way I could see? So those companies are not going to willingly give up any power. So the only way I see it happening is if somehow the government decides that they don't need that corporate money either, and they decide to do things differently. I don't know what exactly the things are. Like what policies do you implement? I can't say. I don't have any, none are coming to mind right now, but there's got to be something that you can do that pushes this system away from uh, management into curing, like
Yeah.
actually curing disease and curing bad health so that people can be good and deciding that I don't care if it hurts this Pfizer's bottom line or
Hmm.
Johnson and Johnson or whichever company. Like my goal is different than theirs. Because yeah,
Yeah.
they want repeat customers, so they want you sick forever.
Yeah. And I mean, I gotta say, I've been really surprised. Like in New York, and I'm sure this is happening in other cities. There used to be signs up all the time. Cash for your house, and in neighborhoods that were gentrifying. So basically, people just trying to get properties from people who were cash strapped and underpaying them, but getting control of the properties, flipping them, and making a ton of money. And so nowadays I see signs cash for your diabetic supplies. And it just made me
Mm,
think, wow, this stuff must be like gold for people to be, figuring out a way to make money off of it. Like, I don't know how it all works, but, there's clearly a market for buying the stuff, on the street or whatever, and people who have access and are selling it. I mean, it's just like, wow, that really speaks poorly of our country.
I mean, yeah. Um, I wonder. I do wonder what it is about diabetes medicine. Maybe it's just that there are so many people. Um, maybe folks are getting extra or something.
I mean, I
There's a
do
lot
think
of
it's
people who
really
probably need it.
expensive. It's really
Yeah.
expensive. There's a lot of people who need it. And, some people are, I guess, got good insurance, and so they can get extra and sell it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, for those of you who, choose to check your blood glucose and your ketones, like, how expensive those strips are. And it's just, it's ridiculous that it's so expensive, but it
Hmm.
is. So if you need some ketone strips, like, are you going to spend $50 for like 5? Or are you going to go to your local neighborhood drug dealer and instead of buying Coke or crack, you're like, I need ketone strips, please, please.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be it. There's
Mm-hmm.
enough of a demand. There's so many people who have diabetes who can't afford how expensive the medicine is. Um, yeah. And somebody has found a way to fill that void. And the people with good insurance. So then I guess the good insurance folks they have too much.
I mean, I think that for some people with good insurance, like they just send diabetic supplies monthly. And so
Mm,
without really an accurate assessment of what your specific needs are. So if you're not checking your blood glucose, all the time, or you don't need to all the time, you might have, this stuff kind of piles up. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know. So,
all right.
yeah.
That's plausible.
So Chris says, hey, if you can reverse your diabetes, those ads seem like an easy way to get some change. Yeah, I think that this really requires like a grassroots change. And instead of, I mean, the one thing that could happen is, since we don't have the ear of the general media and the authority, going neighbor by neighbor, friend by friend, family member by family member, seeing somebody improve their health, turn around their life, get off the diabetes medicine, like that grassroots approach is going to actually be stronger than, the ads and so on. And, the being sold this idea of being on, insulin for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And doing it grassroots, person to person makes sense. And it makes sense that that would be the way that you like defeat a machine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I had a conversation with a guy today, so I gave blood, and then afterwards, I'm sitting in that waiting area where you're supposed to like sit down for a while to make sure that you don't have adverse effects. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I started talking to this guy, and we were talking about this healthy. They got all these like snacks out, and they're all these like supposedly healthy things, and that's where I saw the tree nut free, dairy free
Mm-hmm.
package. And we ended up talking about how he was saying the thing said it was healthy, but it didn't have, but then he sees that it's dairy free and it's supposed to be a baked good. And we're like, well, that sounds gross then.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at it, and sure enough, there's like canola oil and some other sort of seed oil in there. And I said, I bet it would taste better if it had butter in it. And he said, oh, yeah, you know it does. You're damn right it does.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, see, like, I actually like we've got it all wrong. We started and me and him started talking about Crisco, and I told him how Crisco was cottonseed oil. It was a waste product that they just decided they found a way. They found a way to make it marketable and sold it to us as food.
Mm-hmm.
And um, that actually ended up a really good conversation. And I told him how very briefly I told him that I had changed my health just by cutting sugar and cutting these fake oils. I didn't even say seed oils, but I said all this
Mm-hmm.
like new stuff. Like if we went back to eating how um, our grandparents did, we
Mm-hmm.
would be much healthier. And
Yeah.
I don't know if he heard it. I don't know if that even stuck with him, but hopefully,
I mean, I think some people, get it and it makes sense, and then other people are addicted to sugar and they can't.
yeah.
Now, I wanted to say, let's see. Chase says, unless we as a people arrest those crooks, similar to what Iceland did to the bankers in 2008, this medical for profit nonsense will continue. Yeah, I don't have any hope that the people are going to be able to arrest anybody, but, maybe, maybe in 100 years they'll be like, oh man, we really messed up. Sorry. Well, no, there won't even be a sorry. It'll just be like, well, there's this tiny little fund that we're not going to tell anybody about, but you can apply to this fund to get restitution for, what happened to your ancestors. Let's see. R. Jones says our current food supply chain can't support a change in the dietary guidelines. It can't support enough meat and vegetables in the absence of high grain consumption. I don't think I believe that. There's a lot of cows. There are a lot of cows in, in the United States. And I remember reading, sort of a breakdown, like one cow can support one person for an entire year who's eating keto or carnivore. So I don't think that there is a limit. I think that perhaps the way that we, the animal husbandry may not, the way animals are raised in, large feedlots may not be sustainable. But I don't know. I'm certainly willing. I would prefer to see our meat supply and food supply be decentralized so that, there aren't massive companies that are controlling massive portions of, the food. But I don't know. I don't think that that's true.
Yeah. The only way I could see that possibly being true, because I definitely agree with you that we could supply all the food. I've heard the argument before, and it doesn't take into account we could go into a whole thing about why that argument that well, if everybody ate meat, there wouldn't be there's no way we could have enough cows, for instance. Yeah, we could. This one continent supported way more buffalo than we have of cows now. And regenerative agriculture can put more animals on the land than we have right now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't believe that could be a problem. I could see possibly, because I just don't understand our food distribution system enough, I could see there being a logistical problem, but we've adapted our supply chain to other changes before. I don't see why we couldn't adapt to this one. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be any, what's the word? I guess difficulties. Mm-hmm. There may well could be. We're having a difficulty right now. We can't get a lot of stuff in, and Biden's trying to open the port in LA and whatever. I don't know exactly what's happening, but we have difficulties all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can't get through them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, some of the problems with meat anyway have to do with regulations and not actually supply. It's not even a logistical problem. But, one of the things I do hear, my father, who's a vegetarian and, opposes, eating meat, let me take that back. I'm not saying he necessarily opposes that, but he does think that the world is overpopulated and we're not going to be able to support this level of population on meat the way it could have in the past. And I was kind of one, didn't we just lose 1 million people? But two, and not to be funny, but we just had we're in the midst of a major event. Now, I don't know. I have not looked closely at the numbers, so I don't know if we have, if we lost more people than we normally would have lost in this time frame, regardless of what cause. But, I don't know. Overcrowding, I guess, is a question, but I don't know if that's something, is that something you've heard about? Have you thought about that?
Oh, a lot. So.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because I started my carnivore journey. The first thing that I read, the first bit of anything that I got about carnivore specifically, because remember, I was keto before then, but I wasn't. Keto was just about how I eat. It wasn't about how it affects the world at all. I didn't have any understanding of that. So yeah, my first carnivore bit of research was the vegetarian myth, and in there she talks about the fact that based on a lot of people's research, we either already have too many humans on this planet for what the Earth can just provide, or that we are getting there. And then I haven't read it, but I bought a book called Endgame that I've been meaning to read, which apparently I know Leah or Keith read it. She references it in The Vegetarian Myth, and it's
What's it
apparently
called?
a Endgame, like the
Okay.
second big Avengers movie. Um, and
I don't know. Okay.
oh, A-Day, you
I
just hurt my
know.
soul.
A little bit, yeah. Let's see what the book
So
is.
yeah, we don't need to do that, but I could go grab it like right now. But
No, no, no,
yeah,
don't grab
it's
it. But I'm interested in, like, ugh, all that comes up is Avenger stuff.
let me see if I can find it. So
No,
yeah,
no, no. It's
apparently
okay.
it's about the it's about the like how civilization um has and how it has harmed us and will continue to harm us to the point of like causing our extinction.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know I'm super selfish. You know, it's kind of hard for me to feel a great concern about something that's 300 years down the road or more. I understand that
Hmm.
it is important to, hand over a better world to, the descendants and blah blah blah. But I do have a little bit of a challenge caring about something that's happening 300 years down the road. I'm going
Oh
to admit
no.
that. I do apologize. I know that is incredibly selfish. So I'm sorry, everybody. I don't know if you've lost faith in me as a
You
human, but I'm
I
sorry.
mean, yeah, yeah, because yeah, that's exactly where I am. I'm like trying to leave this world in a better place. Um, I found the book. It's Endgame, Volume One. What is this? The Problem of Civilization, Derek Johnson. So yeah, that's
Oh,
another book in my pile of shame. But yeah, I've thought
okay.
a lot about the idea that there are too many humans on this planet. What does that mean for me and my decisions? What does that mean for us as a society? Um, is part of the reason I'm not pressed to have kids. It does when the vegan folks will say like, there's no way that you could support this population with animals. Um, depending on how they're making their argument, I I hear it out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah. I guess, yeah, I do feel, I don't know. I also wonder whether that is the right decision. I mean, if you don't want kids, you don't need to have kids. But like, I do remember one of my professors in grad school who, had he and his wife had decided not to have children because they were concerned about overpopulation and blah blah blah. And I thought, man, like that's a big decision to make, a big sacrifice to make for the world. And I don't know that I mean, that's a big sacrifice to make. And I don't know that, it's even appreciated by the rest of the world. So
Oh,
if you don't want to have them, then, no need to. But like, if you do and you make that decision, like, I don't know, that just doesn't seem like the way to go about it.
selfish A Day is selfish A Day.
Yeah. I
Like,
guess selfish A Day.
um, one, if you're doing good, expecting it to be appreciated by anybody, give it up, give it a rest. It's not coming.
Yeah.
Like the thanks are few and far between. You do that stuff because you believe in it, period. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Because yeah, if you're looking for any sort of external praise for it, a lot of times it's not gonna happen.
It's
But
true.
yeah, I wouldn't. For me, if my only thought was like, there are other reasons too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like, oh, the world's overpopulated. Um, that's like one of the things that pushes me in the direction that I'm in now.
Mm-hmm. Well, honestly, I've not had in-depth conversations with people about it, so who knows? I mean, for him and his wife, there could have been a whole other level of reasoning that I don't know about. But
Yeah,
yeah. So large
I
picture
think it is
says,
interesting. Go
uh
ahead.
huh. Well, I was just gonna say, large picture says, laughing out loud, A-Day. I have zero issues with your thoughts on the future world, but you know, vegans are gonna take that one clip and go, see, yeah.
The vegan, it won't even be recent or like soon. It'll be like years later. You'll be
Mm-hmm.
at like 1 million followers or something, and they're like, wait, wait, look, way back when.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do care about the world. I do want to. I do. Let's see. I do care about
You
the
gonna clean
world.
it up now?
No, I just want to provide alternate clips that people can select from. But I do care about the world, and that I do support regenerative farming. I think that that is a better path to healing our earth and our land than
Hmm.
trying to only eat plant foods. I mean, I think that we must have animals be a significant part of the whole farming cycle. So yeah, so that's what I think. And I
Yeah.
don't know. It doesn't seem to me. I mean, this was one of the things that Nina had said early on in the conversation that. Let's see. Let me play that one actually. I don't know if I played it already.
What
Yeah,
we're
go ahead.
talking about, in terms of meat, what we're talking about is something that's like, I think, far, far more serious and just a much, much bigger story about
Hmm.
scapegoating meat as the one thing that is it drives climate change, the one thing that we can do to contribute to stopping the warming of the earth, the one thing. I mean, it's just become. I mean, that is a much. I mean, it involves actors like the World Economic Forum at Davos and pretty much every celebrity you've ever heard of. And I mean, it's just a much bigger beast that has created this impression about meat.
So, what I think what she was starting to touch on there too is that, somehow like this narrative has been built that red meat destroys the environment. And that's such a simplified way of like looking at the environment and the issue, but it's
Hmm.
just taken hold, and I find that really frustrating when I someone that I've known for a long time on Facebook, basically attacked me multiple times. I was very polite the first few times, and then I finally came back and and I handed him a bunch of studies, and I was like, this is this is why I believe what I'm talking about, and I have evidence here. What evidence are you showing me? And his rhetoric was really like punctuated by, it's a known fact, everyone knows this, cow farts
Hmm.
and the environment and heart disease, and these are just known facts. And I was like, I can't have a conversation with you if you're not willing to explain, even explain the buzzwords that you're using. I don't even know what that means, cow farts, like you have to be able, well, but I mean, I know the shorthand, but you have to be able to even describe what the heck you're talking about. So
Yeah,
I found that unbelievably frustrating and just rude, just rude. Like I don't, I'm like, don't come at me like that. Essentially he called me, compared me to Trump, being not truthful, lying, and it's just like, you
that
don't
is
get to.
fighting words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm like, you don't get to come at me like that. And, and he's a white man too. So it's like, and he basically shamed me and basically saying what I was doing was, elitist, and it wasn't accessible to, people of color. That meat wasn't. And I'm starting to get really frustrated with this idea that blackness equals poverty. For sure, like we certainly have people who are impoverished, but that is not all of who we are. And that's like, to talk like that is just it's just so annoying. So, right. Yeah. So I'm like, who the heck are you to talk to me like this? You don't get to do that. So we had
it sounds like it was necessary because he wanted to push his opinion on you, and it doesn't even sound like it was asked for. And then the way he's doing it, was so like, oh, well, this is a known fact. This is a known fact. Like, yeah, I've had vegans come at me that way. You realize at some point, like, so the conversation we actually need to have is about the things that you think are facts. It's not even the conclusions that you reached from there, or let's be honest, the conclusion that you were given, because no critical thought happened on your side, because you don't know where any of this came from. These things that you say are facts, you have no idea where they came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, and sometimes I think that some of them are paid shills, or paid, what do you call them, provocateurs, to cause dissension and confusion in these community groups. So I was in a clubhouse this week, and it was about Ketovore, and there was a guy there who was basically saying just a lot of confusing stuff. And then he said, well, so somebody in the group was saying that they started a keto diet, lost all this weight, then went on to do carnivore, continued to lose weight, reversed diabetes, blah, 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 blah. All these great things. So this guy says, well, is it possible there were any other changes that actually were the real cause for you to turn around your diabetes? And I was thinking, like, are you kidding me? Do you think that the diabetes spontaneously reverses? Like, it doesn't happen. Like, things just don't happen like that. So then he went on to say, well, there's studies that show that insulin is a very small portion of what causes diabetes, and that there are other factors that cause diabetes. And I was thinking, what? So I was like trying to message the people who were, running the board. And I was like, dude, this guy is, he's like a shill, a provocateur. He's, paid, or I don't know what he is meant to do, but he is hijacking the conversation, not letting anybody, ask any other questions. And everyone's getting exhausted by trying to respond to him instead of talking about, they're supposed to be on this challenge. And so nobody's talking, about like their basic questions and concerns. But I was like, Oh my God, I've not heard this before. Have you heard that diabetes is not caused by high insulin?
No. I've seen people say that it's not caused by high consumption of carbohydrates, but insulin, I've never seen people say like, oh no, insulin's fine. It's fine to have high insulin, because diabetes is actually caused by insulin's only 10%. And there's this whole other, no, never heard that.
And he didn't say what the other thing was, but
of course not.
Yeah. So I'm like, if you're saying stuff like that, like, we're not even talking about science, like, you're not interested in talking about science, then I don't know how we begin to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's like you said, like, they're a shill, they're a provocateur, like, they, for all intents and purposes, are not real people. Like, I see them on Reddit every once in a while. Not every once in a while, actually, it's been happening more lately. I feel like once a week, a vegan will post something or comment on something in one of the carnivore subreddits, and I see folks, like, arguing with these vegans. It's clear that this dude is a vegan. You can check his post history and you can tell. Let it go.
Yeah.
Just downvote him and move on.
Yeah. So, we've kind of gone off onto, I mean, it's not a tangent. This is really kind of the crux of what Nina was talking about, in that there, there's no real discussion of real science. Actual conclusions of scientific studies that are being quoted are being suppressed. And so, how do we proceed when we're not even talking about the same things? So we went on to talk about, with her, she started the Nutrition Coalition, which is a nonprofit that's really meant to try to get the dietary guidelines to, focus on the science and actually make recommendations that are based off of the existing science that they have. And let's look at why the dietary guidelines matter. So hold on a sec.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't care about the guidelines who have kind of taken their health into their own hands, right? But it still just does, it affects the doctors you see who think you're crazy or give you a hard time or not receptive to what you're doing. They're all very much impacted by these guidelines. It affects your elderly loved ones in nursing homes because they don't have choices about what they're eating. In what's it served in hospitals and airplanes. So it does have an effect on our environment. And so this past guidelines, which came out in 2020, that for the first time ever, they said we should be eating diets lower in red and processed meats. So they actually came out and said that. And they said this was reflected in the data, but they didn't do any, and they have never done any systematic review of the literature on red or processed meats.
So that was one. And then the second
They reviewed the literature on dietary cholesterol, which is one of the reasons you're not supposed to eat meat, right? And They did a review on that. They came out and they said there's no evidence that dietary cholesterol has any impact on your blood cholesterol. And yet the dietary guidelines comes out and still says healthy diets are lower in cholesterol.
It's just lower in meat. Yeah. So that was just sort of stunning, And it's like, how are we as the public supposed to move forward if we're getting conflicting messages? Cholesterol is or it isn't a problem. Like, do we need to control it or not? And and doctors need that information as well to make proper recommendations. So anyway, you can see why it's important to focus on the dietary guidelines.
And it's incredibly frustrating that they would have the data there and draw the first conclusion. And actually, I've seen people make this argument. I've seen people say things very similar to that. That yes, we know that cholesterol does not affect heart health or something, and then they'll still say it's bad. And then they'll reach right back to the same epidemiological studies, and they'll say, well, it's bad because it's also associated with this thing and this thing and this thing. So you still need to keep cholesterol low. And you're like, but that's crap data too. Yeah. That data doesn't actually prove anything. And we already showed that cholesterol actually, your main thing, heart health, it's not related to. It does not, there's no causation there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I feel like I get frustrated because I don't, for me personally, I would love to be able to engage in these arguments. Well, one, I think it is helpful to have these arguments on, on Reddit or other social media platforms, where other people can see the conversation. So, this guy and I that were having this back and forth, it was happening in Facebook Messenger. And as this was happening, I decided I was never going to have another one of these conversations privately again. There's no benefit to that. But if it's done publicly, other people can see it and be, influenced by it. And I I do feel frustrated that I don't have easy access to, talking points, bullet points, position papers, or, even just like a bibliography of the studies that, speak specifically to cholesterol or speak specifically to this, or, sort of an annotated bibliography, because that would be, I'd be willing to engage in these arguments all day long if I had like the list of these 6 studies that say this about cholesterol and just am able to cut and paste and send it. Not that, the vegans, well, the people who are interested in engaging in this argument will look at it, but other people will be able to see it and will be able to follow the links. So that's something I've been thinking about, is how to create that. And I know that there are some people who are trying to do that, what's his name? Same as, I think, Demonolatry on, Demonocracy on Reddit, and he has like the Keto Science Reddit, and he posts a lot of articles and stuff and has some wikis and everything. But I think, it's time to have stuff that's really, very targeted. And I would have loved to have been able to say to that guy, on the Clubhouse, who's like, diabetes is not caused by high insulin. I would have loved to have something to say back to him, but I was just so floored, like that's brand new to me, that I didn't have anything to say. So, I would love to have more of a resource.
Right. That I feel your pain. I have been in arguments where somebody said something that was so outlandish that I wasn't prepared. And it's not even just like I didn't think that anyone would say that, but it's like I literally haven't, like you said, haven't heard this before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so lost that I don't know where to go in this argument anymore, because you just said something that like you shouldn't be able to say out of your face.
Yeah. And then
insulin doesn't cause diabetes. What?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a known fact.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
That's what diabetes is, sir. It's uncontrolled blood sugar, because the insulin doesn't work anymore, because we're so resistant to it, because it's so high and it's been chronically high.
But then I think, there's so much of science I don't agree with or trust. Like, how can I mock someone else for, also not trusting the science? But it's kind of like, you got to draw a line somewhere. I don't know.
No, and see, yeah. I don't have that issue. I could have that argument with him. I do trust the science unless I know that there is a bias within the science, and then I just take it with a grain of salt that is appropriate for the amount of bias there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess that is the definition of diabetes, is having uncontrolled blood sugar and having a state of high insulin. I mean, that's sort of the definition of the condition, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Like, if it's not insulin, then what is it? What's the other thing? That would be, if I didn't feel comfortable enough saying, no, it definitely is, that is the cause of diabetes, period, then I'm going to ask you, all right, so what are the actual causes? If you swear it's this, and see, that's where I mess up sometimes, because then I give that person more room to speak, and that's exactly what they wanted to do.
Well, that was what the problem was, and that's why I was trying to like message the people who are running the thing. So it's like, he can't talk anymore because no one else is able to ask questions. And I got to say that when I was years ago, when Occupy Wall Street was happening, I got pretty involved with it. And one night there, it was like one of their assemblies, and I loved the alternative way that they were using to allow people to speak and to run the rooms. But there was this one woman there, and, we were basically held hostage for like 4 hours by this one woman who we never even got to discussing the issue. It was an argument about how to go about discussing the issue. And after hours, and I was amazed that, like, there were probably like 150 people in the room. I mean, people stayed because they were committed to this process, or, to the Occupy movement, and stayed through being held hostage by this woman. I mean, it was unbelievable. And at a certain point, I was like, she can't be for real. Like, this is, we've been infiltrated. I don't know who the hell she is, but, we have been infiltrated. And, but, she used all the language. She was super radical. And I was like, I guess, the Black Panthers, they must have experienced this. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
This must have been what it's like. But where they found her, I don't know. And then she showed up in Egypt during the, what did they call it? The Arab Spring? She was in some meetings there. And I was like, oh, yeah, this has got to be some kind of fake. Yeah. But we never made it forward. We never did anything. We never made it forward with that assembly. And I saw her at other meetings, and I tell people, like, oh, God, don't let her get started. This is what happened before. So.
Sounds like she's a professional obstacle to forward movement.
I think she's some kind of agent, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But this guy spoke in a way that made me think he's not just confused. He's, like, paid to do this.
Yeah. Very possibly. And I think for some of those people, the payment, this is what's actually really insidious about some of this, is it doesn't even need to be much. It's not like they're getting paid like a job. Like some people, all they need is a little bit of encouragement and this like sense of power that they get from being like, it's like getting a blue check on Twitter, like being verified, being co-signed by this whatever organization or something, and that's all they need for all the ugliness to come out. But it's based around the message of that company.
Yeah.
Some people don't need a full paycheck to become a shill.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, we have gone on and really complained. I think we've gotten it all out of our system for now. What about you guys? Do you feel like we have, talked about the conspiracies enough? Suffice it to say that it's time for us to organize. And I am thinking, very deeply about what that means. Not just carnivores, but meat eaters, low-carb people, keto people. It is time for us to organize as a group and really think about how we change the narrative that is going on around meat. I think that if we don't, we're in a situation where we're not going to have access to meat. And I see MH says, any tips for affording carnivore these days? Meat prices in my area pretty much make it a luxury. So I think that we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more, lab-grown meat, stuff like that. And, as soon as, lab-grown meat, maybe they'll do the usual thing, make it super cheap so that people switch over to it because they just can't afford, the regular stuff. And then once people are mostly doing that, they're going to, and all of the, the other regular meat suppliers have gone out of business and they jack the price up. So that's how it goes all the time, every time. Don't be confused. That's how it goes. And so you will pay less for your Impossible Burger. And then once there's no other choices, they're going to shoot the price up and we're going to be literally consuming Soylent Green. So, I don't know. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the short term, getting the cheapest cuts possible, eating more organ meats, and ground beef and, ground meat is going to be your best bet. And then, on a broader, more longer term, I think finding a local farmer who you can buy, larger amounts from is going to be how you might bring that price down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think definitely the way to go, definitely the cheap cuts, and find a way that you can start buying in bulk. Either share with a friend where you're both filling your freezers, or buy a freezer, buy a standalone, and start buying in bigger quantities, which is also going to mean likely buying local, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I was watching, I mean, we're doing a lot of vegan bashing tonight, but I was watching a vegan channel and he was saying for those people who argue that buying local is better than eating a vegan diet, he pulled up this chart that showed how much of an impact transportation had on that food and versus, you know, the impact that food had on the environment. And so the transportation was small for each and every thing on that list, you know, bigger for meat and smaller for, you know, vegetables all the way down the list. So that was his argument for why, you know, transportation doesn't matter. But I thought, you know, come on, man. Like, you know, if you're
It's
shipping fruit
disingenuous.
from, yeah, if you're shipping fruit, which is happening by air, you know, you're flying this stuff, how can you possibly argue to me that that impact of that, those fossil fuels burning is minimal for, you know, your acai berries or whatever it is that you're eating? Like, I don't understand how you can make that argument.
Yeah, I would very much like to see how that person could come up with those numbers. It
Well, I
also
looked
makes
at
me
the
wonder
chart
too.
and I'm like, I don't know who made this chart, but
Oh, so there's no reference with it?
well, I looked up the chart. I was able to find the original, but I don't know who they are. It's just like, you know, some, you know, world, you know, World Health not World Health, but you know, like someone who cares about the earth, and this is the study. So I
Oh,
asked somebody about it, but I didn't get a response about that. You know, but I was like, I don't know if the organization is legitimate, is what I'm saying.
mm,
Like, you know, it was a pretty nice, you know, it was a pretty looking chart, but I don't know
right.
who they are.
So yeah, I would want to know how they reach those numbers because that doesn't make sense to me. Like you said, like these you got things that are coming from overseas versus me getting meat from like the farthest it's probably going to be is half the country away, unless you're
Mm-hmm.
my actually one of my grocery stores has Australian beef a lot of times. I don't know how that
Mm-hmm.
works. Sometimes it's cheaper than the American meat. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
Um, but also, like, are we looking at price or are we looking at the carbon footprint? Because those are different, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe those plant foods are subsidized in some way. Also, I would take into account the fact that there's so many more. When you're eating plants, you have to eat so much more than when you're eating meat.
Mm-hmm. Well, plant foods are definitely subsidized by the federal government. So,
Right.
and I don't think that the ranchers get the same, they don't get anywhere near the subsidies that the farmers do. So, that's a big problem as well. So,
Right.
plants are artificially much cheaper than animals for us.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is
Oh,
in
and
other countries.
R. Jones makes a good point too. He probably didn't include the fossil fuels used to make fertilizer in his argument. That's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that was something that I, you know, found quite helpful or touching. You know, when Lear Keith wrote in The Vegetarian Myth, which I definitely encourage all of you to read. It was really interesting. But she said she, you know, was really committed to like growing her own food and blah blah blah, and she was going to use a fertilizer that did not require anything to die. You know, so no blood, no, you know, nothing from animals. And she said nothing that she did worked. Like the, you know, fertilizer must come from animals. You know, it
Hmm.
has to be blood. It has to be, you know, feces. It has to be whatever, but it has to come from animals, and it just doesn't work otherwise. And she said, you know, that was like a major realization for her, and it was, you know,
Yeah,
that was very touching to hear that.
I loved that. That was one of the books that started me on the journey to
Mm-hmm.
understanding that, like, we just fundamentally we can't beat nature. We keep
Mm-hmm.
thinking that we can. We try it in so many ways, and it never works.
Yeah. Um. So, yeah. um, definitely meat can be a challenge. It's not easy, sometimes to eat this way. I know, and but honestly, I do think that like regenerative grass-fed meat is great for the environment. It is really helpful, and I think it is the way that we ultimately want to go. Although I don't think if you're not able to afford it right now, just switching to meat is good enough. It's going to get you 85 to 90% of the way there. And, by the time you get there, you can decide how much further you want or need to go. So I would hate for people, for those of you watching, don't feel like if you can't do grass-fed or regenerative right now, don't feel like, you can't do this. You can absolutely do this. And I just actually interviewed somebody yesterday who, like his meat choices, he does the best that he can, but, there's times when he's got to eat from McDonald's or from, 7-Eleven or a truck stop. And so, you do the best that you can at the time, and then, you do better when you can do better. So don't worry about that. Don't feel like you have to do, grass-fed all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just told somebody that today. People ask about grass-fed or do you have to get organic? And no, none of those things are required.
Yeah. And I used to feel like I had to do organic. And one Thanksgiving, I remember I used to make red velvet cake all the time and for Thanksgiving. And so one year I decided to do...
That's so black.
I know.
It's so black.
I'm black. And that was like the number one requested thing. After I started making that, nobody cared about any of the other stuff. Not the turkey, not anything. They're just like the cake. So I decided to, replace all the ingredients with like, the best quality, the highest quality, organic, grass-fed, whatever. And I even got the red food coloring that was made from beet juice. So the cake just did not turn out right. It kind of crumbled. It didn't hold together. It was like a dusty mauve color, which is nice in a blouse, but not in the cake. The whole thing was just weird. It tasted fine, but the texture was weird. The whole thing was weird. And man, everybody was like, don't do that again. I don't care about, organic like that. Just don't do that again. You can do that with the turkey. Yeah, do better.
Right. Don't you fool with that cake no more.
Yeah. Yeah, like you can get organic when it's the turkey or whatever, but don't, just do the regular stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of work to make the cake, though, and I never wanted to make it after, like, the first year or two, and so I was always looking for excuses not to make it, and I was like, oh, it's too expensive, it's too much stuff. And people would bring me the ingredients, or they'd give me money, and I was like, oh, man, I can't get out of doing this.
No.
So
no, that's
first
your
year,
job forever.
Yeah. Well, the first year I went keto, it was like, what am I going to do? So I made the cakes, and I didn't eat them. I didn't taste them. I didn't do any of that. The next year, I did eat them. I ate the cakes and regretted it. And I think the subsequent years, I ate the cake until I did my first... Well, I think I started Carnivore right after Thanksgiving. So I had cake, but then I didn't at Christmas. And then thereafter, I stayed off of it. But, yeah. At first, I was like, oh, man, I'm never going to get this cake again. But now I'm kind of like, that doesn't interest me. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't miss a lot of the stuff that you would think you would expect. Like, I'm not like, oh, sweet potato pie.
Oh, God, no. But I didn't like that anyway. Like, even before. Yeah. If that were the only pie option, I just didn't have dessert. So, I don't know. Yeah. I liked candied yams as a side, but, for my pie, it would be pecan pie or, apple pie maybe, peach cobbler. But, sweet potato pie, it's like more sides. Why would I want more sides?
More sides.
Yeah. It's like, no, we did this
You know,
already.
now I gotta ask more people if sweet potato pie tastes more like a side than a dessert. I never would have thought
Well,
that.
my sides, I always put so much butter and sugar in them that,
Mm,
they could very well have substituted just fine as the filling of a pie. So for me, they were no different. It was exactly the same.
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Anyway, we have had a delightfully long conversation here where we have ranted about all sorts of things. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I love the comments that you were putting in, and I think we had good conversations. And Anna, I actually liked what Anna wrote earlier, which I didn't say. I post pictures of my food most days. My friends are starting to see, 1, I look way better. 2, my food looks better than theirs. 3, they're jealous of how little time I spend cooking and cleaning. I think that's
Mm,
probably like the very best thing, what we're going to have to do in order to push back against, the narrative that's going is, just show like the real life awesomeness that is our way of eating. And that's what's going to change the narrative for people.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that's part of it. That's a big part of it. It's just showing that different works. There's something
Yep.
completely different from what they've been told, and it really works. And actually, it's easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, everybody. So, see you on Tuesday. I have another interview coming, and there's a lot of interesting interviews coming up. So, I did actually have a message with Bitten Johansson, I think is her name. She focuses on, I think she's, is it Swedish? And she focuses on sugar addiction. So I talked to her, and so hopefully I'm going to have her on. I did ask Dr. Hampton, and he's going to be coming on. We haven't gotten it scheduled yet, but he will be. And I have some more of our community telling their stories. So look forward to some interesting stuff coming up. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, everybody. So I'll see you next week, and have a great one. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Good night.